would like to start us off at the most macro possible level because we're going to need the audience to follow us along here. But at the macro level, we're going to get into the topic of the microbiome. If you can help our listeners who may be like me, just barely passed chemistry, could you help us understand what is a microbiome at the highest level?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. That's a great question because it's actually also very much connected to the story of who I am and what I developed. So we probably all heard the great benefits of the good microorganisms that live in our gut. So the gut microbiome. So these are microorganisms, actually the science of, so just terminology, we have the microbiome, which is the science or the genes more specifically of all the living microorganisms that live in or around our body. But we also have the microbiota or the flora, which is the actual microorganisms. So this is like very, very high level. And we've known for quite a while that these microorganisms play an essential role in our health. But with computer capacity in the 2010s and 15, right after we've decoded the human genome, we start looking at the genome of the microorganisms living in symbiosis with human. So human microbiome, the microorganisms genes actually that live with the human. There's different types of microbiome, right? The soil microbiome, the animals, the plants, different ecosystems. But evidently we stay with the human. So in the 2010, 2015, all the great benefits that we thought were possible with these microorganisms were being connected. The links were being made with this computer capacity, able to analyze all that great data. And so what is the skin microbiome? It's the continuation of that. So back in 2014, for myself, I was in an environment in immunology where we talked a lot about the gut microbiome, applications to health and to diseases. In oncology, in immunology, particularly. And they were talking about all the great benefits and all these connections. And for me, having been passionate about the skin and the skin's chemistry and having looked for the missing element, which I didn't know was missing, but I knew something was, I just didn't know what it was. When they were discussing these great discoveries, I thought, okay, what's going on here? There's something there, right? And I kept digging, and particularly on the skin. So the gut microbiome will have benefits all over, even for the mind and for the skin. But the microorganisms living in our skin bring other benefits. And this is what I started discovering and connecting and linked in. And here we are today.
Which is fascinating because admittedly, I only started learning about the microbiome maybe 5 years or so ago. I mean, not to dull our listeners with too many details, but I spent a lot of my childhood on antibiotics. And as a result, I had to learn all about replenishing my gut microbiome. And for some reason, I guess I just never thought of it existing, that little ecosystem existing outside of my gut. So you're saying that that is internal and external on all living beings, all living organisms, that's correct?
Yes, correct,
and
correct.
Are they different in terms of what we're talking about maybe in our gut versus on our skin?
Yes, that's actually a very, very good question. Yes, definitely. So they're different between one person and another, one evidently animal from another, but within one person, depending on the region. Evidently, the microorganisms we have in our gut are not the same that we have in our eyes or hair or scalp mostly, and definitely not the same as those that we have on our face. So it changes depending on the environment. If there's moist humidity, or if there's sebum, so oils, the microorganisms will be different. So on our arms, for instance, we don't have much sebum produced, not a lot of humidity that stays there. So we tend to have very few microorganisms living in that zone. On our face, groin, underarm, there are quite a few living there. They actually say, this includes the gut evidently, but they actually say that there are more microorganisms living on and in our body than we actually have human cells. So this is, and they've been living with us for a while and bringing great, great benefits. We know, like we mentioned, around the immunology, but for the skin's immunology as well, right? It does protect the skin. I see the skin as a double armor, like the skin itself being the structure, the chemistry of it, and the microorganisms living on its surface, protecting that armor, which composes the double armor. That is the ecosystem of the skin. And these microorganisms living on the skin actually protect it from premature aging even, and disbalances.
To dive into maybe a little bit more the environmental side of your offering, because I think that's part of what makes this so interesting. We've had other guests on the show who have talked about maybe over consumerism when it comes to things like fashion or even packaging. But to start on the skincare side, there is also a current push. I don't know if it's a TikTok thing, but certainly of mass consumerism in terms of skincare products. I was even listening to an episode with an esthetician on a podcast the other day saying we should all be washing our faces with bottled water every single day with like a 5-step process. But with your company, you're taking more of a minimalistic approach and trying to streamline that process. Could you talk about why that was important to you in creating your brand?
I call the industry that I'm in really the before after industry. It looks at a symptom and tries to correct it and gives you an ingredient or 2 or 3, or you do this and you do that and you do this in the morning, this in the evening, once a week, twice a week, double cleansing, cycling, and all these things, right? Really, which chemically, like the chemistry of the skin, it just didn't make sense. It just didn't. So I finished my PhD and I was looking, like, okay, where can I get experience and to develop something, because I didn't feel solid enough to develop something that didn't exist. And I was, like kind of humbled also, like with the big lab, I would expect them to develop something, honestly. And if they hadn't, who was I to develop it, right? And then I went on to get experiences in biotech, in nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals, and I'm a really passionate person in the sense that I want to help. So I wanted to help my skin, but I also wanted to understand it. And oncology affected my life, not directly, but my family's life. My son, he's great, but was affected. My mother got leukemia, and she was the trigger of going into this oncology path where I started digging as well to understand, okay, what was going on? Because at the time, leukemia was cancer. We didn't know like the different types, and so I went on into biochemistry and doing these studies to understand it. It's sort of a control of our environment. So what can we do, and how can we prevent these, right? And I knew again the solution was in nature, was part of understanding how the body worked with its environment. We know specifically for oncology that 80% of cancers are related to the environment in its large sense, in the behaviors we have, the lifestyle, where we live, what we eat, some of them we control, most of them we don't, but it's still external factors that cause these diseases, if we say. So I'm on this path, and myself being still passionate about the skin, passionate about protecting the skin, and working now in skin cancer and skin immunology and these projects because they always attracted me, and I somehow always ended up working on them as well, right? So myself as a consumer, I'm going to, different places asking for products again, because in my 30s, in my 40s, I still had these, either breakouts or very irritated skin, and trying all these products and, going, with the hormones and everything going on, you get what you get. And, although it didn't quite make sense, I didn't necessarily have the time to investigate or to find something that made really good sense. So I did what I could, basically, up until the moment my daughter became a teenager. By that time, my cabinet of product was full of products. So my daughter kept going in there and trying things, and I said, no, this, you can't do this, right? One, this is too early, because I do believe like the skin needs to be left to itself as long as possible, which is certainly not the trend that's encouraged,
No.
right? And but at the same time, like my cabinet was full, but I kept asking for one product. Give me one, because I'm not going to do the whole thing, like, oh yeah, but you need this one for this and this one for that, and da da da. And so when my daughter looked into my cabinet and we tried to figure out something that made sense for her, it kind of all aligned. The environment, the oncology background, the health of the skin, the chemistry, the microbiota, because I had done that deep dive on the microbiome at that point, and I knew there lied something that we had to, to explore. And this was back in 2016, 2017. And this is when I started, okay, let's start from scratch and think about the skin and go one solution for the skin, and look at what is common between one person and another, and not what is different, which are only symptoms, honestly, because the organ itself, including its microbiota, it works the same between you and me, and between my grandmother and my son, right? It's all the same functioning. The only difference really is that my son produces a lot more sebum because his hormone kicked in, and also sometimes lacks a bit of some salts, right? But there's some just elements that are disbalanced, but at the core it all works the same.